Republicans' nominee to succeed Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the U.S. Supreme Court. This, of course, comes at an extraordinary moment for our country in the grip of a pandemic. And 22 days away from Election Day, we are taking you inside a look at this hearing room where we've seen some of Amy Coney Barrett's children, her husband, family members. It's a large hearing room on Capitol Hill where other Supreme Court confirmation hearings have taken place, but never quite like this in terms of timing and in terms of what the country is going through. That's one of the senators seated now. In a moment, we're going to hear opening statements from the senators. There's Lindsey Graham, the Republican chair of the Judiciary Committee, talking to his counterpart, Democrat Dianne Feinstein, who is the ranking Democrat on this committee. As we watch this unfold, these few moments before the hearing gets underway, I want to go to NBC's Casey Hunt, who covers Capitol Hill for us. And Casey, of course, this comes at a time when we're very close to Election Day. In fact, some people are already voting in states that allow early voting, and that itself is the backdrop and the controversy that underscores this moment.
So many ballots even already cast, Savannah, and that incredibly heated political crucible, really, that we are in is the backdrop for this hearing. And that is, of course, a big part of why Republicans want to move so quickly to try and put Amy Coney Barrett on the court. This hearing just 16 days after she was nominated, and they want to take this to a final vote on the floor before Election Day. And part of the reason for that is what we're going to hear Democrats focus on today. Just a week or so after the election, the Supreme Court is expected to hear arguments on the Affordable Care Act. It's a lawsuit that would basically strike down that law, and Amy Coney Barrett, if confirmed, would be in a position to potentially rule on that. So Democrats today, you'll see in a few minutes, planning on displaying photos of constituents who could stand to lose their health care if that were to happen. We also, Savannah, can report that Senator Mike Lee, who's in this room, and you pointed out how different this is because of the pandemic. Senator Lee was at the White House, was positive for coronavirus. He's appearing here in person today. Savannah.
All right. We are watching this hearing room. It's gabbling in right now. I believe you see the nominee walking in. Let's take a listen.
Learn about the differences in judging and maybe the differences in the party. If that happens, it'll be a successful hearing. As to the hearing room, I doubt if there's any room in the country that's been given more attention and detail to make sure it's CDC compliant. The architect of the Capitol, working with the attending physician, has set up the room in a fashion that we can safely do our business. Senator Lee is back. You've been cleared by your physician. Welcome back. The COVID problem in America is real. It's serious, it's dangerous, and we have to mitigate the risk. I would just let every American know that many of you are going to work today, probably already been at work, and I hope your employer will take care of your health care needs. But we do have a country that needs to move forward safely, and there are millions of Americans, cops, waitresses, nurses, you name it, going to work today to do their job, and we're going to work in the Senate to do our job, and one of the most important jobs the Senate Judiciary Committee will ever do is have hearings and confirm a justice to the Supreme Court. So for housekeeping purposes, the first day has traditionally been opening statements by my colleagues. We'll do 10-minute rounds, and everybody will have 10 minutes to talk about their views of the hearing and what this is all about. Then we will have a panel to introduce Judge Barrett, and she will make an opening statement. We'll try to finish mid-afternoon if that's possible. Then Tuesday and Wednesday will be long days. There'll be 30-minute rounds for every senator, followed by a 20-minute round. My goal is to complete that Wednesday at some kind of reasonable hour in the evening. Thursday, we will begin the markup. I intend to hold it over and bring the committee back on the 22nd to vote on the nomination. So if I may, I'll start off with an opening statement and say, why are we here? Number one, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg died on September the 18th. What can you say about Justice Ginsburg? She was confirmed 96-3. Now, those were days that have since passed. I regret that. 96-3. Now, this was a person who worked for the ACLU, someone who was known in progressive circles as an icon. Apparently, just about every Republican voted for her. Her good friend on the court, Justice Scalia, I think got 97 votes. I don't know what happened between then and now. I guess we can all take some blame, but I just want to remind everybody there was a time in this country where someone like Ruth Bader Ginsburg was seen by almost everybody as qualified for the position of being on the Supreme Court, understanding that she would have a different philosophy than many of the Republicans who voted for her. 27 years on the court. Before becoming a member of the court, she was an active litigator, pushing for more equal justice and better rights for women throughout the country. Her close friend, until his death, Justice Scalia called her the leading and very successful litigator on behalf of women's rights, the Thurgood Marshall of that cause. What high praise. I can't say any more than that statement says. In my view, the person appearing before this committee is in a category of excellence, something the country should be proud of, and she will have a chance to make her case to be a worthy successor and to become the 9th member of the Supreme Court of the United States. On September the 26th, Judge Amy Barrett was nominated by President Trump to the Supreme Court. Who is she? She is a judge sitting on the 7th Judicial Circuit. She's highly respected. She was a professor at Notre Dame. 3 years during that tenure, she was chosen by the students to being the best professor, which I'm sure is no easy task at any college. She's widely admired for her integrity. She grew up in New Orleans, graduated from Rhodes College in Memphis, Tennessee in 1994, graduated summa cum laude and first in her class from Notre Dame Law School in 1997. So academically, she's very gifted. She clerked for Judge Lawrence Silberman on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, and then for Justice Scalia on the Supreme Court. She practiced law in Washington, D.C. She joined the faculty at Notre Dame in 2002. She's published numerous articles in prestigious journals, including the Columbia, University of Virginia, and Cornell Law Review. She's been a circuit court judge at the 7th Circuit since 2017. She was confirmed to that position with a bipartisan vote. She has heard hundreds of cases in that capacity. She said, "I clerked for Justice Scalia more than 20 years ago, but the lessons I learned still resonate. His judicial philosophy is mine. A judge must apply the law as written. Judges are not policymakers, and they must be resolute in setting aside any policy views they might hold." She will give her statement, but I think that is a good summary of who she is. That's who Amy Barrett is in terms of the law. In terms of Amy Barrett, the individual, she and her husband have 7 children, 2 adopted. So 9 seems to be a good number. The process. This is an election year. We're confirming the judge in an election year after the voting has occurred. What will happen is that my Democratic colleagues will say, this has never been done, and they're right in this regard. Nobody's, I think, has ever been confirmed in an election year past July. The bottom line is Justice Ginsburg, when asked about this several years ago, said that a president serves for 4 years, not 3. There's nothing unconstitutional about this process. This is a vacancy that's occurred through a tragic loss of a great woman, and we're going to fill that vacancy with another great woman. The bottom line here is that the Senate is doing its duty constitutionally. As to Judge Garland, the opening that occurred with the passing of Justice Scalia was in the early part of an election year. The primary process had just started. And we can talk about history, but here's the history as I understand it. There's never been a situation where you had a president of one party and the Senate of another, where the nominee, the replacement was made in an election year. It's been over 140 years ago. I think there have been 19 vacancies filled in an election year. 17 of the 19 were confirmed to the court when the party of the president and the Senate were the same. In terms of timing, the hearing is starting 16 days after a nomination. More than half of all Supreme Court hearings have been held within 16 days of the announcement of the nominee. Stevens 10, Rehnquist 13, Powell 13, Blackmun 15, Berger 13. All I can say is that I feel that we're doing this constitutionally, that our Democratic friends object to the process. I respect them all. They'll have a chance to have their say. But most importantly, I hope we will know more about how the law works, checks and balances, what the Supreme Court is all about when this hearing is over. Why hold this hearing? A lot of people on our side say just ram it through. I hear that a lot. That's why I don't listen to the radio much anymore. So the bottom line is I think it's important. This is a lifetime appointment. I would like the world and the country to know more about Judge Barrett. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of what you've accomplished. I think you're a great choice by the president. This is probably not about persuading each other unless something really dramatic happens. All Republicans will vote yes and all Democrats will vote no. And that will be the way the breakout of the vote. But the hearing is a chance for Democrats to dig deep into her philosophy, appropriately ask her about the law, how she would be different, what's on her mind. It gives Republicans a chance to do the same thing. Most importantly, it gives you a chance, the American people, to find out about Judge Barrett. Judge for yourself. Is this person qualified? Is she as qualified as Sotomayor and Kagan? I think so. These were two nominees presented to the committee by President Obama. They had a different legal philosophy than my own, but I never doubted one moment that they were not qualified. I thought Gorsuch and Kavanaugh were qualified. The Senate in the past has looked at qualifications more than anything else. We've taken a different path at times. Bork, Thomas, Alito, Kavanaugh. I hope we don't take that path with Judge Barrett. She doesn't deserve that. I don't think it makes this hearing any better. And the American people, I believe, would not deserve a repeat of those episodes in the Senate Judiciary Committee's history. To my Democratic colleagues, I respect you all. We've done some things together, and we've had some fights in this committee. I've tried to give you the time you need to make your case, and you have every right in the world to make your case. I think I know how the vote's going to come out, but I think Judge Barrett is required for the good of the nation to submit to your questions and ours. This is going to be a long, contentious week. I would just ask one thing of the committee. To the extent possible, let's make it respectful. Let's make it challenging. Let's remember the world is watching. Senator Feinstein.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. And I do want to just address your last statements. We feel the same way, and I believe we want this to be a very good hearing. And I certainly will strive to do my best to achieve that. Good morning, Judge Barrett, and welcome to you and your family. Less than 1 month ago, the nation lost one of our leading voices for equality. Ruth Bader Ginsburg left very big shoes to fill. Judge Ginsburg loved the law, and she loved this country. She worked all of her life to ensure that the opening words of our Constitution, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union," included all the people, not just a few, elite few. She was a standard bearer for justice. Justice Ginsburg's nomination was the first one that I participated in when I came to the Senate, and it was a real thrill to be part of that crowded and celebratory hearing for someone who had broken down barriers and reopened doors and staunchly believed in a woman's right to full equality and autonomy. In filling Judge Ginsburg's seat, the stakes are extraordinarily high for the American people, both in the short term and for decades to come. Most importantly, health care coverage for millions of Americans is at stake with this nomination. So over the course of these hearings, my colleagues and I will focus on that subject. We will examine the consequences if, and that's a big if, Republicans succeed in rushing this nomination through the Senate before the next president takes office. But most importantly, in just a few weeks, on November 10th, the Supreme Court will hear hearings in Texas v. California, a case brought to strike down the ACA. The president has promised to appoint justices who will vote to dismantle that law. As a candidate, he criticized the Supreme Court for upholding the law and said, and I quote, "If I win the presidency, my judicial appointments will do the right thing, unlike Bush's appointee, John Roberts, on Obamacare," end quote. And when he appointed Judge Barrett to fill Justice Ginsburg's seat, the president said that eliminating the Affordable Care Act would be, quote, "a big win for the USA." Judge Barrett, you've been critical of Chief Justice Roberts for his 5-4 opinion upholding the law, stating that Roberts, quote, "pushed the Affordable Care Act beyond its plausible meaning to save the statute," end quote. This well could mean that if Judge Barrett is confirmed, Americans stand to lose the benefits that the ACA provides. So I hope you will clarify that in this hearing. First, more than 130 million Americans with pre-existing conditions like cancer, asthma, or even COVID-19 could be denied coverage or charged more to obtain health insurance. This includes more than 16.8 million Californians with pre-existing conditions. And we are just one state, but I think you should know how we feel. Secondly, some 12 million working Americans are covered through the ACA's Medicaid expansion. If the act is struck down, they lose their health care. Third, more than 2 million Americans under the age of 26 are covered by their parents' health insurance, and they could lose that coverage. Fourth, insurers could charge higher premiums for women simply because of their gender. And fifth, women could lose access to critical preventive services and maternity care, including cancer screenings and well-woman visits. Now, the bottom line is this. There have been 70 attempts to repeal the ACA, but clearly the effort to dismantle the law continues, and they are asking the Supreme Court to strike down the Affordable Care Act. This, I believe, will cause tremendous harm. Consider people like Christina Monroe Garcia of my home state. At age 60, Christina's eyesight started to fail because of cataracts. She had always struggled to obtain insurance because of pre-existing conditions, including C-sections and epilepsy. The cost of coverage, when it was even offered to her, averaged between $2,500 and $3,000 a month, far more than she and her husband could afford. In 2010, she was able to obtain coverage through the Affordable Care Act. Within weeks, she was able to have cataract surgery. This saved her life. Christina described her reaction when she was able to get coverage through the California Health Exchange following passage of the ACA. And let me quote, "It was like manna from heaven. I cried. After all these years of struggling to obtain coverage, I was able to get insurance through the California Exchange, no questions asked about my pre-existing conditions. The premium was worth $200 a month as compared to the $2,500 to $3,000 monthly payments I would have to pay before the ACA if I could even get an insurer to offer me coverage." As Christina further explained, and I quote, "People just don't understand what it was like, the incredible fear before the Affordable Care Act, having to worry about being able to cover medical expenses and not being able to find affordable insurance," end quote. We can't afford to go back to those days when Americans could be denied coverage or charged exorbitant amounts. That's what's at stake for many of us, for America, with this nomination. And that's why the questions we will ask and the views, hopefully, that you will share with us are so important. We are now just 22 days from the election, Mr. Chairman. Voting is underway in 40 states. Senate Republicans are pressing forward, full speed ahead, to consolidate a court that will carry their policies forward with, I hope, some review for the will of the American people. President Trump said last week that he had, quote, "instructed my representatives to stop negotiation over a COVID-19 relief package until after the election," end quote, and to, quote, "focus full-time on confirming Judge Barrett to the Supreme Court." When Justice Scalia died in February of 2016, Senate Republicans refused to consider a replacement for his seat until after the election. At the time, Senator McConnell said, "The American people should have a voice in the selection of their next Supreme Court justice." When asked in October 2018 if Republicans intended to honor their own rule if an opening were to come up in 2020, Chairman Graham promised, quote, "If an opening comes in the last year of President Trump's term and the primary process has started, we'll wait till after the next election." Republicans should honor this word for their promise and let the American people be heard. Simply put, I believe we should not be moving forward on this nomination, not until the election has ended and the next president has taken office. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Feinstein. Senator Grassley.
Welcome, Judge. On March 1, 2016, Justice Ginsburg delivered a eulogy for her friend, Justice Scalia. Justice Ginsburg said, quote, "We were different, yes, in our interpretation of written text, yet one in our reverence for the courts and its place in the U.S. system of governance," end of quote. Justice Ginsburg's remarkable life and legacy will be honored for a generation, and also Justice Scalia's. The Senate is now tasked with carrying out perhaps its most solemn duty under the Constitution, As we go through this process, we should heed Justice Ginsburg's words with a shared reverence for the court and its place in our constitutional system. This idea of place in our system of government is critical. Ours is a government of separated powers. The power to make, enforce, and interpret law isn't centralized in one person or one branch of government. That's not a mistake. You all know what our American Revolution was all about and what the Constitution is all about, because people at that time were sick and tired of one person, George III, restricting American colonies of freedom that English-speaking people elsewhere exercised. As Justice Scalia reminds us, the framers recognized the separation of powers as, quote, the absolutely central guarantee of a just government, because without a secure structure of separated powers, our Bill of Rights would be worthless, end of quote. But this constitutional system only succeeds if each branch respects its proper role. A good judge understands it's not the court's place to rewrite the law as it sees fit. It's not his or her place to let policy, personal, or moral principles dictate an outcome of a case. We are fortunate. Judge Barrett's record clearly reflects this standard. She said, quote, a judge must apply the law as written. Judges are not policymakers, and they must be resolute in setting aside any policy views that they might hold. End of quote. Judge Barrett's service reflects an exceptional intellect paired with deep commitment to the rule of law. So we look to those who know her well. She's received praise across the legal profession and ideological spectrum. Former colleagues at Notre Dame described the judge as, quote, brilliant, industrious, gracious, and kind, and as a person of utmost integrity with an open mind and an even temperament that is prized in a judge, end of quote. She's also known as, quote, a generous mentor. And she's known for her, quote, her humility, graciousness, and her ability, born of her credibility, to build consensus among differing views, end of quote. Her students, quote, expressed awe with the power of Judge Barrett's intellect, with her mastery and organization of complex material, and with her professionalism, end of quote. Leaders of more than 200 liberty-supporting groups across the country say Judge Barrett, quote, possesses the judicial temperament and philosophy necessary as a bulwark for our Constitution and institutions of government, end of quote. 24 state governors described Judge Barrett as, quote, a woman of great moral character who is devoted to her country, community, family, and faith like many Americans, end of quote. The Wall Street Journal editorial board says, quote, President Trump's nomination of Coney Barrett for the Supreme Court is the highlight of his presidency, end of quote. A promise kept, a promise made, a promise kept. Liberal Harvard law professor Noah Feldman called Judge Barrett, quote, a principled, brilliant lawyer, a genuine and good person, highly qualified to serve on the Supreme Court. That's a pretty high praise. I just recited from others. Moreover, Judge Barrett is a tireless mother of 7. For decades, I've led efforts in the Senate to improve foster care and promote adoption. So it's a privilege for me to welcome a justice like that to the Supreme Court. To sum up, Judge Barrett's qualifications and character are impeccable. Unfortunately, I expect the minority will try to rustle up baseless claims and scare tactics as they've done for decades. Anything to derail the confirmation of a Republican nominee. Lately, the left is threatening to pack the Supreme Court in retaliation for this confirmation process. Even the Democrats' nominee for president and vice president have not ruled out such blatantly partisan policy grabs. Republicans are following the Constitution and the precedent. It seems Democrats would rather just ignore both. The left is also suggesting Judge Barrett's confirmation would be the demise of the Affordable Care Act and the protection for pre-existing conditions. That's outrageous. As a mother of 7, Judge Barrett clearly understands the importance of health care. So let's set the record straight. Then Professor Barrett criticized Chief Justice Roberts' conclusion that the Affordable Care Act penalty was actually a tax. Democrats say her viewpoint is radical and a preview of how she might vote on the court. First, her comments dealt with a provisional law that's no longer in effect. So the legal questions before the court this fall are entirely separate. Moreover, her criticism of Roberts' reasoning is mainstream, not only in the conservative legal community, but well beyond. I'm the chairman of the Finance Committee and was ranking member when Democrats unilaterally cobbled together Obamacare. I know a tax when I see one. This wasn't a tax. It was never discussed in committee as a tax. Even the Democrats who forced it through Congress insisted it wasn't a tax. Jeffrey Toobin wrote that Roberts' tax argument was, quote unquote, not a persuasive one. President Obama even said, quote, I absolutely reject the notion that it was a tax. Further, Democrats and their allies shouldn't claim to know how any judge would rule in any particular case. Just look at history. The left slammed Stevens for his consistent opposition to women's rights. They called Anthony Kennedy sexist and a disaster for women. They said David Souter would, quote, end freedom of women in this country. Ultimately, the left praised these very justices that they attacked. Their doomsday prediction failed to pan out. Democrats and their leftist allies have also shown that there is no low that they won't stoop to in their crusade to tarnish a nominee. And I saw it all as chairman of this committee when Kavanaugh came up. Some of my colleagues may once again try to misrepresent and outright disparage Judge Barrett's religious beliefs and affiliations. In 2017, they suggested Judge Barrett was too faithful or too Catholic to be a judge. One senator asked whether she considered herself an Orthodox Catholic. Another told her, the dogma lives loudly within you, and that is of concern. Let me remind everyone that Article 1 clearly prohibits religious tests for serving in public office. Mr. Chairman, I got 5 sentences left. Judge, you'll no doubt be asked how you'll rule on questions and issues and whether the case was correctly decided. I expect that you'll follow the example of Justice Ginsburg. A nominee should offer no forecast, no hints of how he or she'll vote, because that's the role of a judge. That's the place of a judge in our system of government. Unbiased, fiercely independent, faithful to the rule of law, and a steadfast defender of the Constitution. Judge Barrett, I look forward to our conversation. Once again, congratulations.
Thanks, Senator Grassley. I believe Senator Leahy will now join us virtually.
Thank you. And I assume you can hear me all right?
Yes, sir. We see you. There you are. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, as I listen to this, I think about the fact that I've served in the Senate for 46 years. During that time, we had 20 Supreme Court nominations, 16 confirmation hearings, and I can tell you right now, none looked anything like this. We're less than 2 weeks from Justice Ginsburg being laid to rest. Now, it's true that the responsibility of this committee to consider her replacement on the Supreme Court, but this isn't the way we should do it. We should not have had a nomination ceremony before Justice Ginsburg was even buried, while the nation was mourning her passing. We should not be holding a hearing just 16 days later when this committee has afforded itself 3 times as long to vet other modern nominees to our nation's highest court. We shouldn't be holding a hearing 3 weeks from a presidential election when millions of Americans have already voted. Now, when doing so requires that literally half of the Senate goes back on their word. Think of that, my Republican colleagues. Literally half of the Senate had to break their word, contradicting every argument they made 4 years ago about the American people needing a voice during election year vacancies. We should not be holding this hearing when it's plainly unsafe to do so. 2 members of this committee are just now emerging from quarantine after testing positive for COVID. And when other members have declined to get tested, and the chairman has refused to implement a daily testing regime to keep members and staff and Judge Barrett and her family safe. And I might say we shouldn't be spending time on this when we're doing absolutely nothing to pass a much-needed COVID bill. Every senator on this committee knows in their heart this total break with precedent, break with their commitments is wrong. More than 212,000 Americans have died due to COVID. Millions more are hurting. The virus is spiking again across the country. The Senate Republicans have nothing to say about that. The Senate is wearing blinders to the grim realities facing Americans. Instead of talking about COVID and doing something to help the American people, we're engaged in this mad rush to fill a Supreme Court vacancy on the eve of a presidential election. And why? I think the answer is painfully clear. With this vacancy, President Trump and Senate Republicans see the potential to wildly swing the balance of the court. They see the ability to take the courts from being independent to making them instead an arm of the far right in the Republican Party. The potential to accomplish through the courts what they failed to accomplish by votes in the halls of Congress. And the top of their hit list is the Affordable Care Act. It's no secret, it's no coincidence that Republicans are rushing to confirm Judge Barrett before the Supreme Court considers the latest Republican-led lawsuit to overturn the Affordable Care Act on November 10th. The president has even promised that any judge he nominates will overturn the Affordable Care Act. One member of this committee has promised he won't vote for a judge unless he has that commitment that the nominee will overturn the act. And for her part, Judge Barrett's writings have made it unequivocally clear she considers the act unconstitutional. In fact, overturning the Affordable Care Act has been perhaps the single most important policy objective of the Republican Party during the past decade. If Republicans are now successful, the results will be nothing short of catastrophic for the millions of Americans who depend upon its coverage and projections. These are real people. I believe you have in the committee, and I'm trying to get this so you can actually see it. This is Mary Naden Scott. She lives in Northfield, Vermont. That's just over the ridge from my home in Middlesex, Vermont. In her 20s, Mary was diagnosed with Friedreich's ataxia, a rare neurological disease. Like my wife, Marcelle, and I apologize for, I know you have this picture in the committee room. Mary worked as a nurse, realizing she would soon no longer be able to pursue the career she loved. She asked the hospital to rotate her through different specialties so she could help more people in as many ways as possible. That's who she is. And now she's in a wheelchair. She can no longer practice nursing. She does everything she can to take care of her two children. I actually had the pleasure of calling one of her sons on his birthday last spring. And Mary, I know, attends their soccer games. She helps with their remote school. She even brought them to tour the Vermont State House. Now, Mary can do this because her medication and in-home care is paid for by her insurance. But she's worried, even with some state protections. She's worried what the Supreme Court case next month will mean for people with pre-existing conditions like her. For Mary, if she lost her insurance, her biggest worry is she'd lose her in-home support that allows her to continue living at home and taking care of her children. Now, she's a fighter. And when I think of what the Affordable Care Act means to millions of Americans, what's on the line with this nomination? I think of Mary. I think of what she's going to lose. And she's not the only one. You know, I talk to Vermonters all the time. Now, think of another one, Martha Richards. She is an amazing, amazing woman. She's another Vermonter who reached out to my office concerned about the fate of the Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act. Martha earns just over the minimum wage in Vermont. She works for the Vermont State Parks, and she's raised 2 kids on her own. Just look at this person. Soon after rolling now in the expanded Medicaid program, she began experiencing debilitating pain in her ear behind her eye. It led to a series of expensive medical tests, including 2 MRIs. It would cost $6,000 each. She shudders at the thought of what would have happened without the Medicaid expansion. If it's discarded now, as Republican attorneys general have requested a case before the Supreme Court, millions of Americans like Martha would be on their own. Now, I do not suggest that Judge Barrett personally desires these consequences or personally desires to devastate the lives of these 2 Vermonters. Far from it. But these are nonetheless the consequences if her stated views on the law prevail in the Supreme Court, and if Republicans are successful in filling this vacancy prior to November 10th. Well, then we know these views will almost certainly prevail. So that's what's at stake here. That's what weighs heavily on me as we begin these hearings. It also weighs heavily on the minds of the Vermonters I represent. And I've heard from them often and loudly since Justice Ginsburg's passing. They're scared, Judge Barrett. They're scared that your confirmation would rip from them the very health care protections the millions of Americans have fought to maintain, and which Congress has repeatedly rejected eliminating. They're scared that the clock will be turned back to a time when women had no right to control their own bodies, and when it was acceptable to discriminate against women in the workplace. They're scared that at a time when we are facing the perilous impacts of climate change, bedrock environmental protections are going to be eviscerated. And they're scared that your confirmation would result in the rolling back of voting rights, workers' rights, and the rights of the LGBTQ community to equal treatment. These aren't just thoughts. These are real-life implications of decisions made by the court. And a majority of Americans, like an overwhelming majority of my fellow Vermonters, don't support taking our country in that direction. And Republicans first announced their intention to fill Justice Ginsburg's seat just 1 hour after her death. From that moment, this process has been nothing but shameful. Worse, it will almost certainly lead to disastrous consequences for Americans. Justice Ginsburg, I am certain, would have dissented, and I will too, on behalf of Vermonters, on behalf of the integrity of the Senate, and on behalf of the majority of Americans who oppose this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Leahy. Senator Cornyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Barrett,
We've been
welcome to you
watching
and your
as the confirmation hearing for Amy Coney Barrett to the United States Supreme Court gets underway this morning. We've heard from the chairman of the committee, Republican Lindsey Graham, and the ranking member, Democrat Dianne Feinstein, as well as two of the more senior members, Republican and Democrat. And these opening statements from the senators will continue. Bit of housekeeping. Chairman Graham said that he expects to be able to hold a vote in committee on this nomination on October 22nd, which would clear the way for a final vote on her confirmation to the court before Election Day. And as I bring in Pete Williams, our justice correspondent who covers the court for us, we've already seen the outlines of where these fights are going to be over the next few days, Pete, having to do with the legitimacy of this process at all. And you know where Democrats want to take this on the issue of health care. And we've already seen those battle lines being drawn this morning.
Right. I think the hearing is going to be as much about President Trump and his nomination and the process as it is going to be about Amy Coney Barrett, because there doesn't seem to be much doubt that she is qualified in the sense that she has the credentials and the intelligence and the skill to do the job. Savannah, on the Affordable Care Act, it is true that in 2012, Amy Coney Barrett was strongly critical of the Supreme Court's first ruling that upheld Obamacare. The question was whether the individual mandate requiring every American to buy insurance was unconstitutional. How can Congress require everybody to buy something from a private business, went the argument. And the Supreme Court, led by Chief Justice Roberts, writing the majority opinion, said, well, it is a legitimate use of Congress's taxing authority, because if you don't buy insurance, you have to pay a penalty on your income tax. In the intervening years, the Republican-led Congress did away with the tax. So now what the states attacking Obamacare say is, well, you can't say it's a use of Congress's taxing authority because it isn't a tax anymore. So that's going to be a big question before the Supreme Court. And Amy Coney Barrett may well, if she sticks to her guns in the 2012 vote, say, yes, the individual mandate is unconstitutional. But that's not the end of it, because I think the big question in the case the Supreme Court will hear the week after the election is, well, what if that is true? Can the rest of the law be saved? And I don't know how she would vote on that.
Well, there's a case that has dramatic legal and real-life consequences and political consequences, as well, as we are in the middle of election day upon us, but of course early voting already underway. Pete, I know you'll keep your eye on this hearing, as will we. A little bit later, Amy Coney Barrett herself will be introduced and give an opening statement to the committee. NBC News will bring it to you live. For most of you, you'll return today. You can continue watching coverage on NBC News Now.